The grandfather clock in the marble hallway chimed midnight, its deep resonance echoing through the corridors of Blackthorn Manor like a death knell. Thomas Ashworth adjusted his black vest and smoothed his dark hair, checking his reflection. In the ornate mirror that hung beside the grand staircase, 3 years he had served in this mysterious household. 3 years of managing an estate that seemed frozen in time. And tonight would be the night he finally spoke the words that had been burning in his chest like molten silver. Countess Serafina Blackthorn descended the stairs with the fluid grace of shadow itself, her midnight blue gown trailing behind her like liquid darkness. Her pale skin seemed to glow in the candlelight, and her raven black hair cascaded over her shoulders in waves that caught the flickering flames. Thomas felt his breath catch in his throat, as it did every evening when she emerged from her chambers. "Good evening, Thomas." Her voice was like velvet over steel, cultured and refined with an accent that seemed to belong to no particular era. "I trust everything has been attended to during my rest." "Yes, my lady," Thomas replied, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. "The correspondence has been sorted, the household accounts balanced, and the gardens have been tended to your specifications." He paused, gathering his courage. "There is, however, one matter that requires your attention." Serafina raised an elegant eyebrow, her crimson lips curving into the slightest of smiles. "Oh, and what matter might that be, my faithful Thomas?" The way she said his name sent shivers down his spine. For 3 years, he had been nothing more than a devoted servant, managing her affairs while she slept through the daylight hours. He had never questioned her nocturnal nature, never pried into the reasons why she kept heavy curtains drawn throughout the manor, never asked about the strange visitors who came calling only after sunset. He had simply accepted her as she was, and in doing so, had fallen hopelessly, desperately in love. "My lady," Thomas began, his voice trembling slightly, "I have served you faithfully for 3 years, and in that time, I have come to—" He faltered, the words catching in his throat like thorns. "Yes," Serafina prompted, her dark eyes studying him with an intensity that made him feel as though she could see directly into his soul. "I have come to love you," he said in a rush, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know it is presumptuous of me, a mere servant, to harbor such feelings for someone of your standing, but I cannot continue to pretend that what I feel is simply loyalty or professional dedication." Serafina's expression shifted, surprise flickering across her features like lightning across a storm cloud. She had lived for centuries, had seen empires rise and fall, had witnessed the depths of human nature in all its forms, but the simple declaration from her human butler caught her completely off guard. "Thomas," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of warning, "you do not know what you are saying. You do not know what I am." "I know enough," Thomas replied, taking a step closer. "I know that you are kind to those who serve you, that you have a sharp mind and a wit that could cut glass. I know that you read poetry in the library until dawn, that you tend to the night-blooming jasmine in the conservatory with your own hands, and that you have the most beautiful laugh I have ever heard, even though you try to hide it behind that mask of aristocratic composure." Serafina's eyes widened, and for a moment, the carefully constructed facade she had maintained for centuries began to crack. "You know nothing of what I truly am," she whispered, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "I am not the benevolent mistress you believe me to be." "Then tell me," Thomas challenged, his blue eyes blazing with determination. "Tell me what you are, and let me decide for myself whether it changes how I feel." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the steady tick of the grandfather clock and the distant sound of wind rattling the windows. Serafina studied Thomas's face, searching for any sign of fear or revulsion, but found only honest devotion and stubborn determination. "I am a vampire, Thomas," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am a creature of the night, sustained by blood, cursed with immortality. I have lived for over 3 centuries, and I have taken more lives than you could possibly imagine." Thomas absorbed this revelation without flinching, his gaze never leaving her face. "I suspected as much," he said quietly. "The way you avoid daylight, the visitors who come only after dark, the fact that I have never seen you eat food or drink wine at the dinners you host. I may be a simple man, my lady, but I am not a fool, and yet you still claim to love me?" Seraphina asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Knowing what I am, what I have done, I love you because of who you are, not despite it," Thomas replied, taking another step closer. "I have seen your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. I have watched you care for the people in the village, ensuring they have enough food and medicine during the harsh winters. I have seen you spare the lives of those who would do you harm, when you could have easily destroyed them." Seraphina turned away, her composure finally cracking. "You cannot love a monster, Thomas. It is impossible. Then you do not know love at all," Thomas said, his voice gentle but firm. "Love is not about perfection, my lady. It is about acceptance, about seeing someone's true nature and choosing to stand by them regardless of the consequences." When Seraphina turned back to face him, Thomas saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before: vulnerability. For just a moment, the centuries-old vampire who commanded respect and fear from supernatural beings across the continent looked like nothing more than a lost and lonely woman. "You're serious about this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. A slow smirk spread across her lips, but Thomas could see the uncertainty beneath it. "You would truly bind yourself to a creature of darkness." "I would bind myself to you," Thomas replied without hesitation. "Light or dark, mortal or immortal, I choose you, Seraphina. I choose you above all else." The Countess stared at him for a long moment, her ancient heart stirring with emotions she had thought long dead. In 3 centuries of existence, no one had ever looked at her with such complete acceptance, such unwavering devotion. It terrified her more than any vampire hunter or holy relic ever could. "This is madness," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then let us be mad together," Thomas replied, extending his hand toward her. "Let us see where this madness leads." The grand ballroom of Blackthorn Manor had been transformed into a scene from a Gothic fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floors, while hundreds of candles flickered in ornate sconces, their warm light reflecting off the gold-leafed walls. Tonight was the autumn equinox gathering, an annual event where supernatural beings from across the region came to pay their respects to Countess Seraphina Blackthorn and conduct their ancient business. Thomas stood at attention near the main entrance, dressed in his finest formal attire, watching as creatures of myth and legend filed into the ballroom. Werewolves in expensive suits chatted quietly with elegant fine nobles, while other vampires glided across the floor with predatory grace. Despite knowing the true nature of his mistress for a week now, Thomas still felt his pulse quicken at the sight of so many supernatural beings gathered in one place. Seraphina had not spoken of his confession since that night in the hallway. She continued to treat him with the same polite professionalism as always, but Thomas caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something different in her gaze now, a wariness mixed with something that might have been longing. "Thomas." Seraphina appeared beside him with that uncanny vampire silence, making him jump slightly. She wore a gown of deep burgundy silk that hugged her curves and pooled around her feet like spilled wine. A necklace of black pearls adorned her throat, and her hair was arranged in an elaborate updo that exposed the elegant line of her neck. "I need you to be particularly attentive tonight. Some of our guests can be unpredictable." "Of course, my lady," Thomas replied, trying to ignore the way his heart raced whenever she stood close enough for him to catch her subtle perfume of jasmine and something darker, more mysterious, as if summoned by some invisible signal. The conversations in the ballroom suddenly ceased. Every head turned toward the main entrance as a figure materialized from the shadows. Beyond the doorway, Vincent Ravencrest entered with all the dramatic flair of a theater actor, his long black coat billowing behind him like wings. He was tall and imposing, with sharp cheekbones and silver hair that gleamed in the candlelight. His pale skin held the same marble perfection as Seraphina's, but where her beauty was ethereal and haunting, his was cold and predatory. Thomas felt Seraphina tense beside him, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on his arm. The simple touch sent electricity through his entire body, but he could sense her distress. "Vincent," Seraphina said, her voice carefully neutral as the ancient vampire approached them with a predatory smile. "My dear Serafina," Vincent replied, taking her free hand and bringing it to his lips for a kiss that lingered just a moment too long. "You look absolutely radiant tonight. Immortality continues to suit you beautifully." Thomas felt a surge of jealousy so intense it nearly knocked him off balance. The casual intimacy of the gesture, the way Vincent's eyes never left Serafina's face, the possessive undertone in his voice, it all made Thomas want to step between them and claim what his heart insisted belonged to him. "Vincent," Serafina repeated, gently extracting her hand. "I wasn't expecting you this evening." "You didn't send word ahead. Some visits are best left as surprises," Vincent replied, his silver eyes finally acknowledging Thomas's presence with obvious disdain. "I see you still keep human pets." "How quaint." The insult hit Thomas like a physical blow, but he forced himself to remain still and silent. This was not his world. These were not his people, and any reaction from him would only cause problems. "For Serafina, Thomas is my butler and estate manager," Serafina said coolly, "and he is under my protection. I trust you will remember that." Vincent's smile widened, revealing the tips of his fangs. "Of course, my dear. I would never dream of harming something that belongs to you." The emphasis he placed on the word "something" made Thomas's jaw clench. "What brings you to my home, Vincent?" Serafina asked, clearly wanting to move the conversation away from Thomas. "Must I have a reason to visit an old friend?" Vincent replied, but his tone suggested there was indeed more to his visit. "Though now that you mention it, I do have something of importance to discuss with you. Perhaps we could speak privately." Serafina hesitated, glancing at Thomas. "I'm afraid I have duties as a hostess tonight. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting later in the week." "I'm afraid this matter cannot wait," Vincent insisted, his voice taking on a harder edge. "It concerns your future, Serafina. Our future." The way he said "our future" made Thomas's blood run cold. He had heard that tone before, in the voices of men who believed they owned whatever they desired simply by virtue of wanting it. "Very well," Serafina said after a moment. "Thomas, please ensure our guests are attended to. We'll speak in the library." As she moved to follow Vincent, Thomas found himself speaking before he could stop himself. "My lady, if you need anything at all, you need only call." Both vampires turned to look at him, Vincent with amusement and Serafina with something that might have been gratitude. "Thank you, Thomas," she said softly. "I'll keep that in mind." Left alone in the ballroom, Thomas tried to focus on his duties, but his attention kept drifting to the closed library doors. What could Vincent possibly want with Serafina that was so urgent? And why did the vampire's possessive manner make Thomas feel like howling at the moon? Nearly an hour passed before the library doors opened again. Vincent emerged first, his expression triumphant, followed by Serafina, whose face was carefully blank. Thomas immediately moved toward them, his protective instincts overriding his common sense. "Everything all right, my lady?" he asked, not caring that Vincent was watching the exchange with obvious interest. "Everything is fine, Thomas," Serafina replied, but her voice sounded strained. "Vincent was just leaving." "Actually," Vincent said, his smile sharp as a blade, "I was hoping to stay a bit longer. After all, Serafina and I have so much to celebrate." "Celebrate?" Thomas asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "Vincent has proposed marriage," Serafina said quietly, her eyes not meeting Thomas's. "It would be advantageous for both our territories." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. Marriage, of course. She was a countess, an ancient and powerful vampire. It made perfect sense that she would marry someone of her own kind, someone who could match her in power and immortality. What had he been thinking? Imagining that a human butler could ever compete with centuries of vampire politics and tradition? "Congratulations," Thomas managed to say, though the word tasted like ashes in his mouth. "I'm sure you'll be very happy." Together, Vincent's smile became even more predatory. "Oh, we will be. Serafina and I have known each other for over 2 centuries. We understand each other in ways that mortals simply cannot comprehend." Thomas felt something inside him break at those words, but before he could respond, Serafina spoke up. "I haven't given Vincent my answer yet," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "This is a decision that requires considerable thought." "Of course," Vincent agreed smoothly, "though I hope you won't keep me waiting too long. Some opportunities shouldn't be allowed to slip away." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Thomas found himself stepping closer to Serafina, his protective instincts overriding his heartbreak. "Is there anything you need from me, my lady?" Serafina looked at him then, really looked at him, and Thomas saw something flicker in her dark eyes, surprise, perhaps, at his continued devotion even in the face of this revelation. "Vincent," she said suddenly, not taking her eyes off Thomas, "I think it's time for you to leave. I'll send word when I've made my decision." Vincent's expression darkened. "Serafina, surely we can discuss this further." "I said I need time to think," Serafina repeated, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that brooked no argument. "Good evening, Vincent." The ancient vampire looked as though he wanted to argue further, but something in Serafina's stance must have warned him off. With a curt bow, he swept from the ballroom, leaving Thomas and Serafina alone among the lingering guests. "My lady," Thomas began, but Serafina held up a hand to stop him. "Not here," she said quietly. "Too many ears, too many eyes. Meet me in the conservatory after the last guest has departed." Thomas nodded, his heart hammering against his ribs. Whatever was about to happen, whatever she was about to tell him, he knew his life was about to change forever. The conservatory at Blackthorn Manor was a sanctuary of glass and moonlight, where exotic flowers bloomed in eternal twilight. Night-blooming cereus unfurled their ghostly white petals, while jasmine vines wound through wrought iron trellises, filling the air with their intoxicating fragrance. Thomas waited among the shadows, his heart pounding as he listened to the soft trickle of the central fountain and the whisper of wind through the glass panels overhead. The last of the supernatural guests had departed an hour ago, their carriages disappearing into the mist that perpetually shrouded the moors surrounding the estate. Thomas had supervised the cleanup with mechanical efficiency, his mind replaying Vincent's words over and over. "Serafina and I have known each other for over 2 centuries. We understand each other in ways that mortals simply cannot comprehend." Perhaps Vincent was right. Perhaps Thomas had been a fool to think that 3 years of devotion could compete with 2 centuries of shared history and immortal understanding. "Perhaps you came." Serafina's voice drifted through the darkness, soft as silk against his frayed nerves. Thomas turned to find her silhouetted in the doorway, having traded her formal gown for a simple dress of midnight blue that made her look younger, more vulnerable. The moonlight streaming through the glass ceiling caught the highlights in her raven hair and painted her pale skin with silver. "You asked me to," Thomas replied simply, drinking in the sight of her. Even now, knowing she might soon belong to another, he couldn't help but marvel at her ethereal beauty. Serafina moved deeper into the conservatory, her bare feet silent on the stone pathway that wound between the flower beds. "I need to tell you something about Vincent, about our history together." Thomas felt his chest tighten. "My lady, you don't owe me any explanations. Your personal affairs are—" "Stop," Serafina interrupted, turning to face him. "Stop calling me my lady and stop pretending that what passed between us last week meant nothing. I can hear your heartbeat, Thomas. I can smell your emotions on the air. Your pain is so sharp it cuts through me like a blade." The raw honesty in her voice made Thomas's breath catch. "Then you know how I feel about Vincent's proposal." "I know," she whispered, "and I know you deserve the truth, even if it changes everything between us." She moved to the fountain at the center of the conservatory, trailing her fingers through the water as she gathered her thoughts. "Vincent Ravencrest is the vampire who made me," she said finally. 250 years ago, I was dying of consumption in a convent in the Scottish Highlands. I was 23 years old, pious and terrified, watching my life slip away one bloody cough at a time. Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. Her maker, the vampire who had turned her, who had given her immortality. In vampire lore, such bonds were considered sacred, unbreakable. "He came to me in my final hours," Serafina continued, her voice distant with memory, "beautiful and terrible, like an angel of death. He offered me a choice: die as the weak, mortal thing I was, or become something powerful enough to reshape the world around me. And you chose immortality, Thomas said quietly. I chose life, Serafina corrected. Or what I thought was life. I was so young, so naive. I believed Vincent when he told me we would be eternal companions, that he was saving me out of love. Her laugh was bitter as winter wind. I learned too late that Vincent Ravencrest loves only power and control. Thomas moved closer, drawn by the pain in her voice. What did he do to you? For 50 years, he kept me isolated, dependent entirely on him for guidance and blood. He taught me to hunt, to kill, to take what I needed without mercy or remorse. He molded me into the perfect predator, cold and calculating and utterly without conscience. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. When I finally found the strength to break free from him, I fled to this estate and tried to build something different, something better than the monster he had created. You're not a monster, Thomas said fiercely. I've seen how you treat the people in the village, how you care for those who serve you. You may have done terrible things in your past, but that doesn't define who you are now. Serafina turned to look at him, tears glistening in her dark eyes like captured starlight. Vincent believes he owns me, that the bond between maker and child gives him the right to claim me whenever he chooses. Tonight was not a proposal, Thomas. It was a declaration. He intends to take me back whether I consent or not. The fury that rose in Thomas's chest was so intense it nearly staggered him. The thought of Vincent forcing Serafina into anything, of using their supernatural bond to control her, made him want to tear the ancient vampire apart with his bare hands. Over my dead body, he said, his voice rough with rage. Thomas, no. Serafina moved to him swiftly, her hands coming up to frame his face. You don't understand what you're saying. Vincent is centuries old, powerful beyond your imagination. He could kill you without even trying. Then I'll die trying to protect you, Thomas replied, covering her hands with his own. I meant what I said last week, Serafina. I love you. Not the perfect, untouchable Countess you pretend to be, but the woman who tends to night-blooming flowers because they remind her of beauty in darkness. The woman who reads poetry until dawn because immortality can be unbearably lonely. The woman who chose to rebuild herself into something worthy of love despite everything she suffered. Fresh tears spilled down Serafina's cheeks as she stared at him. You would truly stand against Vincent for me, knowing what he is, what he could do to you. I would stand against the devil himself for you, Thomas said without hesitation. I would face down all the armies of hell if it meant keeping you safe and free. Something shifted in Serafina's expression then, a wall crumbling that had stood for centuries. No one has ever, she whispered, in all my years, no one has ever offered to fight for me without expecting something in return. I expect nothing, Thomas said softly, only the chance to love you as you deserve to be loved, freely, completely, without conditions or demands. The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle splash of the fountain and the whisper of wind through the glass. Then Serafina was kissing him, her lips soft and desperate against his, her immortal strength tempered by profound gentleness. Thomas felt the world fall away around them, narrowing to nothing but the taste of her mouth and the silk of her hair beneath his fingers. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together in the silver moonlight. Vincent will not give up easily, Serafina warned, her voice barely audible. He'll see your devotion as a challenge, a game to be won. The danger to you will be very real. Then we'll face it together, Thomas replied, his thumb brushing away the tears on her cheeks. You don't have to fight him alone anymore, Serafina. You don't have to face anything alone. Together, she repeated, as if testing the word on her tongue. I'd forgotten what that could mean. Let me remind you, Thomas said, pulling her closer. Let me spend whatever time we have showing you what it means to be truly loved. Serafina's smile was radiant as starlight as she kissed him. Again, pouring centuries of loneliness and longing into the contact. Around them, the night-blooming flowers opened wider, as if responding to the love finally blooming between the vampire Countess and her devoted human. In the distance, a wolf howled at the moon, and Thomas couldn't help but feel it was a song of triumph. Whatever battles lay ahead, whatever dangers Vincent might bring, This moment was theirs, this love was theirs, and Thomas would die before he let anyone take it away. "Stay with me tonight," Serafina whispered against his lips. "Dawn is still hours away, always." Thomas replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "For as long as you'll have me." Hand in hand, they walked deeper into the conservatory, leaving the fountain and the formal pathways behind for the wild garden that grew in the far corner, where moonlight and shadow danced together in perfect harmony. The underground court of the Eternal Council lay hidden beneath the ruins of an ancient monastery, its vaulted chambers carved from living stone and lit by torches that burned with an eerie blue flame. Thomas had never imagined such a place could exist, a subterranean palace where vampires had gathered for millennia to settle disputes and enforce the old laws that governed their kind. He stood now in chains of blessed silver that burned his wrists, flanked by Vincent's supporters, while Serafina faced the Council of Seven from her position in the center of the circular chamber. 3 nights had passed since their confession in the conservatory, 3 nights of stolen moments and whispered plans before Vincent had arrived at dawn, with an army of enforcers to drag them both before the ancient tribunal. Serafina Blackthorn intoned Council Elder Morgana, her voice echoing off the stone walls like the toll of funeral bells. The ancient vampire appeared to be carved from marble herself, her white hair flowing like water and her eyes holding the weight of countless centuries. "You stand accused of violating the sacred laws by attempting to grant immortality to a human without the consent of your maker." "I have made no such attempt," Serafina replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. She wore simple black robes provided by the council, her hair unbound and falling around her shoulders, like a dark waterfall. Even in these dire circumstances, Thomas thought she had never looked more beautiful or more defiant. "But you intended to." Vincent stepped forward from his place among the accusers, his silver hair gleaming in the torchlight. "My child has been seduced by this mortal's blood, corrupted by his primitive emotions. She speaks of love as if it were something more than base hunger dressed in prettier words. Love," Elder Morgana repeated, her tone suggesting she found the concept distasteful. "A human emotion, fleeting and weak. What place has such a thing in the immortal realm?" "Love is what separates us from mere beasts," Serafina said, lifting her chin defiantly. "It is what makes our immortality meaningful rather than simply an endless cycle of hunting and feeding." Murmurs rippled through the gathered vampires, some approving and others scandalized. Thomas caught sight of faces in the crowd, beings so ancient they seemed more like living statues than anything that had ever been human. "Blasphemy," hissed Elder Cassius, his gaunt face twisted with disgust. "We are apex predators, not lovesick children playing at mortality. This human has poisoned your mind, girl." "No one has poisoned anything," Thomas found himself speaking, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite his fear. Every eye in the room turned to him, and he felt the weight of their collective predatory attention like a physical force. "What exists between Serafina and myself is real, and it was born of mutual respect and understanding, not manipulation or coercion." Vincent laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "Listen to it speak as if it has any right to address this. Council, tell me, little mortal, what could you possibly offer my progeny that I cannot? What could your brief, flickering existence provide that centuries of power and knowledge cannot?" Thomas felt his chains burning deeper into his flesh, but he forced himself to stand straighter. "I offer her freedom," he said simply. "The freedom to choose her own path, to love without conditions, to be valued for who she is rather than what she can provide. Freedom," Vincent's expression turned venomous. "Freedom to throw away her immortal heritage for a few decades of mortal sentiment. Freedom to weaken herself with human emotions. Freedom to be more than the monster you tried to make her." Thomas shot back, his protective instincts overriding his self-preservation. "You speak of love as weakness, but it took more strength for Serafina to break free from your control than most beings possess in their entire existence." The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent's eyes blazed with fury, and Thomas could see the vampire's fangs extending as his control slipped. "Enough," Elder Morgana commanded. "Vincent Ravencrest, you claim this human has corrupted your progeny. The law allows you to challenge him in single combat to reclaim what is yours by right of creation. I accept, Vincent said immediately, his predatory smile returning. Though it hardly seems fair to call it combat, perhaps execution would be more accurate. Wait. Serafina stepped forward, her voice sharp with panic. The laws also state that I may choose a champion to fight in my defense. As the accused, that right supersedes Vincent's claim. Elder Morgana nodded slowly. True. Whom do you choose as your champion? Serafina Blackthorn. I choose Thomas Ashworth. Serafina said without hesitation. I choose the man who loves me enough to stand here before the most powerful vampires in existence and defend our right to be together. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers and outraged protests. The idea of a human fighting a centuries-old vampire was not just unlikely. It was suicide. You cannot be serious, Elder Cassius sputtered. A mortal against Vincent Ravencrest. This is not justice, it's slaughter. The choice has been made, Elder Morgana said, raising her hand for silence. However, given the obvious disparity in strength and speed, the Council will allow modifications to the traditional combat. This will be a battle of wits and will rather than pure physical prowess. Vincent's confident expression faltered slightly. What do you mean, 3 trials? Elder Morgana explained. First, a test of knowledge each combatant will answer. Questions about vampire law and history. Second, a test of will. Both will be subjected to the blood compulsion and must resist its effects. Third, and only if necessary, a test of worthiness. Each must demonstrate why they deserve Serafina's loyalty. Thomas felt hope flicker in his chest. This wasn't the hopeless physical battle he had expected. These were challenges that relied on more than supernatural strength. Ridiculous, Vincent snarled. I am her maker. My claim supersedes any silly tests you might devise. Your claim will be honored if you prove superior in all 3 trials. Elder Morgana replied coolly. However, if the mortal proves himself worthy, the Council will recognize his right to compete for Serafina's hand on equal terms. And if I win? Thomas asked, hardly daring to hope. If you win, Elder Morgana said, her ancient eyes studying him with newfound interest, you will be granted the choice of immortality, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. You would become Serafina's equal in every way that matters to our kind. The chamber fell silent as the weight of this pronouncement settled over everyone present. Thomas felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he looked at Serafina, seeing hope and terror warring in her dark eyes. I accept, he said firmly. Whatever the trials, whatever the risks, I accept. Vincent's face twisted with rage, but he nodded curtly. Very well. Let us see how long your mortal courage lasts when faced with the true power of immortality. As the Council began preparing the chamber for the trials, Thomas caught Serafina's eye across the circle. She mouthed a single word, courage, and he felt strength flow through him like fire. Whatever happened next, whatever horrors these trials might hold, he would face them for her. He would face anything for the chance to love her, as she deserved to be loved. The ancient torches flared, higher, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls as the underground court prepared to witness a battle, unlike any in their long, dark history. The tower room at the very peak of Blackthorn Manor had been Serafina's private sanctuary. For over a century, a place where she could watch the world change through the tall windows that faced in all 4 directions. Now, as the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, Thomas stood beside her, no longer her servant, but her eternal equal. The trials had been brutal beyond imagination. Thomas had matched Vincent question for question in vampire history, drawing on 3 years of careful observation and countless conversations with Serafina about her world. The test of will had nearly broken him. The blood compulsion was a psychic assault that felt like having his very soul torn apart. But his love for Serafina had proven stronger than even ancient vampire magic. The final trial, the test of worthiness, had been decided not by grand gestures or dramatic speeches, but by a simple truth. Vincent spoke of possession and control, while Thomas spoke of partnership and growth. When forced to choose between a maker who demanded submission and a lover who offered equality, Even the council could see which path led to genuine strength. I can feel it beginning, Thomas said softly, his voice rough from the screaming that had marked his transformation. The change had taken 3 agonizing hours. His mortal body dying and being reborn as something immortal and powerful. Every cell in his body hummed with newfound strength, every sense sharpened to supernatural clarity. The hunger, Serafina asked, moving closer to him. She wore a simple white dress that flowed around her like moonlight, and her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. In the growing light of dawn, she looked like a vision of ethereal beauty. No, Thomas replied, turning to face her fully. The belonging. For 3 years, I loved you from across an impossible divide. Now, he reached out to touch her face, marveling at the way his enhanced senses could detect the faint pulse of immortal life beneath her skin. Now we're truly equals. Serafina leaned into his touch, her eyes closing with relief and joy. When Vincent first turned me, I thought immortality was a curse, an endless existence without purpose or meaning. But with you, she opened her eyes, and Thomas saw forever reflected in their dark depths. With you, eternity doesn't seem long enough. We'll make it enough, Thomas promised, pulling her into his arms. We'll fill every moment with purpose, with love, with all the things Vincent never understood. Below them, the manor was stirring to life. Through their enhanced hearing, they could detect the servants beginning their morning routines, the groundskeeper heading out to tend the gardens, the cook starting preparations for the day's meals. But none of that mattered now. The world outside, their tower room felt distant and unimportant compared to the miracle of this moment. Vincent will not forgive this defeat easily, Serafina warned, though her tone held no fear. He'll try to find ways to strike at us, to prove that our love is weakness. Let him try, Thomas replied, his voice carrying a new authority that came with his transformation. He spent centuries trying to break your spirit and failed. He'll find that together, we're stronger than anything he can devise. Together, Serafina repeated, savoring the word. I still can't quite believe it's real. 250 years of solitude. And now you're not alone anymore, Thomas finished. You'll never be alone again. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, its light streaming through the eastern windows. Thomas felt no pain from the illumination. Newly turned vampires could tolerate daylight for brief periods, and the tower room's glass had been specially treated to filter out the most harmful rays. I have an idea, Serafina said suddenly, a mischievous smile playing at her lips. Something Vincent never allowed me to do. What's that? Thomas asked, intrigued by the spark of rebellion in her eyes. I want to modernize the manor, open it up to others like us, vampires who've been cast out by their makers, supernatural beings who need a safe haven, even humans who've discovered our world and have nowhere else to turn. Her eyes blazed with passion as she spoke. I want to build something Vincent's kind would hate, a place where love matters more than bloodlines, where acceptance trumps tradition. Thomas felt his heart swell with pride and admiration. This was the woman he had fallen in love with, not just beautiful and powerful, but visionary and compassionate. A sanctuary, he said thoughtfully, a place where the rules are based on kindness rather than control. Exactly, Serafina said, her excitement growing. We could establish new traditions, create a community built on mutual respect instead of fear and dominance. It would drive the old guard absolutely mad. Then let's do it, Thomas said without hesitation. Let's build something beautiful out of all this darkness. Serafina's smile was radiant as she kissed him, her lips warm and familiar against his. When they broke apart, both were grinning like conspirators planning the most wonderful rebellion in history. There's one more thing, Thomas said, his expression growing serious. I want to ask you something I should have asked long ago. Serafina raised an eyebrow. Curious, Thomas dropped to one knee, pulling a simple silver ring from his pocket. It had been his grandmother's, the only thing of value he had brought with him when he first came to work at the manor. Serafina Blackthorn, will you marry me? Not because of vampire politics or ancient laws, but because I love you and want to spend eternity proving it every single day. Tears sparkled in Serafina's eyes as she looked down at him. Thomas Ashworth, I thought you'd never ask. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him to his feet for another kiss. This one deeper and more passionate than any they had shared before. Round them, the tower room seemed to glow with golden light as the sun reached its full. "Morning glory, Lady Seraphina Ashworth," Thomas said, testing the sound of her new name. "I like the sound of that," Seraphina replied, her smile radiant. "Though I think I prefer partner to lady. We're equals now, remember, partners," Thomas agreed, wrapping his arms around her, in everything, as they held each other in the growing daylight. Both could feel the future stretching out before them like an endless tapestry of possibilities. There would be challenges ahead, certainly. Vincent would not give up easily, and the vampire establishment would resist their efforts to change ancient traditions. But together they felt ready for anything. Below them, Blackthorn Manor hummed with quiet activity, soon to be transformed from a lonely fortress into a beacon of hope for supernatural beings, seeking a different way of existence. The estate that had once sheltered Seraphina's solitude would become a home for dozens of others who had been cast out or rejected by their own kind. "I love you," Thomas whispered against her ear, the words carrying the weight of forever. "And I love you," Seraphina replied, her voice soft with wonder. "My eternal partner, my chosen family, my home." Outside the tower windows, the world continued, its ancient dance of day and night, mortal and immortal, tradition and change. But inside their sanctuary of glass and light, two souls who had found their perfect match began planning the revolution that would reshape their corner of the supernatural world. Their love story had begun with a servant's devotion and a countess's loneliness. It would continue as something far grander, a partnership that would challenge centuries of vampire law and prove that love, when freely given and freely received, was indeed the most powerful force in any realm. As the morning sun climbed higher, Thomas and Seraphina remained in each other's arms, eternal devotion burning between them like an unquenchable flame. They had eternity ahead of them, and they intended to make every moment count.